On behalf of our whole team at Civic Health Project, welcome and thank you for joining today's panel entitled, How Do We Inspire and Equip America's Youth to Embrace Connection, Not Division? I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today, Seth Henderson, David McCullough, Caroline Mell, and Manu Meal. Seth joined the Aspen Institute Citizenship and American Identity program in 2018, and he currently supports the team's Better Arguments Project, a new national civic initiative to bridge political divides. Seth has led the implementation and design of the Better Argument Project's innovative middle school curriculum. David founded American Exchange Project in 2019 to foster cultural exchange opportunities for American high schoolers. The project offers online as well as travel-based experiences. David himself has taught and tutored students of all ages from preschool to high school and has coached high school baseball. Caroline is the co-founder and executive director of Open Mind. This is a nonprofit ed tech organization that leverages behavioral science techniques to equip people with the mindset and the skill set for constructive dialogue. Open Mind's evidence-based tools have been used by more than 45,000 people across more than 15 countries. Manu is an aspiring social entrepreneur who has leadership experience in both the public and the private sector. Currently, Manu serves as the CEO of Bridge USA. This is a national organization that aims to improve political culture across divides on college campuses. Last but not least, I'm delighted to introduce today's moderator. Paul Salmon has been the PBS NewsHour's economics correspondent for over 30 years. In that time, he's won 8 Emmys, 3 Peabodys, a Loeb Award, and a James Beard. He's taught at the Harvard Business School, as well as at Yale, Brandeis, Oxford, and the Gateway Community College. Paul also serves as a member of the board of directors for the American Exchange Project. So we know that today's panel topic is near and dear to Paul's heart, and we're delighted to have him with us today. Our recorded version of this panel picks up after a round of introductions between Paul and our panelists.
So the 4 pilot schools, we did it in Charlottesville, Virginia. We were in Chicago, Illinois, New York, and Bismarck, North Dakota. And we're right now, literally, as I said, we just launched this updated version of the curriculum this week. So we'll be learning soon where many of the other middle schools across the country are downloading the resource and further want to use the resource for their schools.
Cool. David, where are we? What are our ambitions?
I think our ambitions are, we believe that one of the best things this country could do for the preservation of its democracy and the development of its young people is to attach to every single high school diploma that we give out a ticket to a town that's totally different from the one that kid just grew up in. It's a huge ambition, but we've been working on it, and it began at the Dumpling Daughter in Weston, Massachusetts, when I was scratching my head about what to do with my life after grad school and called on my old professor, Paul Solomon, to wonder about it. And we wanted to create an organization that would help kids or people from different backgrounds become friends with each other. For the last year and a half, AEP has been running Zoom video calls about 4 to 6 times a week, initially with kids from 3 towns in rural Texas, 1 town in rural Louisiana, and then 3 more affluent liberal elite suburbs of Boston. We basically created a friend group out of about 100-ish kids from those towns last year, just on Zoom calls. Sometimes we were talking about political division. Sometimes we were talking about differing views on abortion. Other times we were debating whether or not a hot dog was a sandwich, or if you were on the lam from the FBI, what's the best Eastern European country to hang out in or hide out in. Both worked equally well. In fact, the hot dogs worked a little bit better than the deliberative discussions we found. We've been starting to scale that program. We're now in about 40 high schools in about 15 states across the country, although we want to make AEP about free travel. And starting on September 1st, we will be launching an entirely new model for a national domestic exchange program. And right now, we've hired a staff. We have a volunteer staff of about 20. We are working with 50 plus advisors across the country. We have one journalist from the PBS NewsHour who is being very generous with his time and helping us out as well, in addition to that staff. And we've had folks commit from about 10 different states across the country, from Kenai, Alaska to San Diego to Boston to San Francisco to Kilgore, Texas. And we anticipate quite a few more states and communities coming in. We've really just been working on going out there and kind of pre-releasing the new model in the last month. And we'll be continuing to do so through May. And then on September 1st, we launched this national domestic exchange program.
Manu, who are you dealing with now? Where are you going? Where do you hope to go?
Yeah, well, one of the things that you said, Paul, in the beginning is you got middle schools, you got high schools, you have college, and then you have a tool that applies to everything. And that, I think, speaks to the power of the moment, which is that our problem is not capacity. Our problem is meeting demand by actually showing people that this is what they want. We have an implicit demand problem. And so that's how we're looking at it. And one thing that I want to just commend David on is I remember the first time he described AEP to me, one thing that stuck out, he said, we're going to create the largest summer camp for high school students. And I think that's such an interesting way to look at it, because you take out the politics from the equation. And for us, college students, our work is a little bit more focused because students are more looking for target opportunities. And so that should sort of animate how we've looked at this broader discussion problem. Let me give you a quick story. So in 2017, I see John Pimentel in the crowd, so go Bears. In 2017, when I was a freshman, at UC Berkeley, basically there were these massive protests on campus because this right-wing speaker by the name of Milo Yiannopoulos came, and we had huge destruction of campus property, but also just mass discord on campus. I was walking through coffee shops and you could see CNN covering UC Berkeley's campus, and I'm walking by the CNN truck as they're doing it. It was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. And importantly, what I learned was two things. One is students are incredibly pissed off. And the second thing is, especially among college students, is there's a lot of apathy and hopelessness within the system, which leads to either a disengagement from the system or a radical engagement into the system. And that's at least the problem that's plagued a lot of campuses. And our goal is that reality actually doesn't describe most students. What that reality describes are the people on the extremes who are the loudest. And our job and our North Star is, how do we make Bridge the leading option for a young person that has three qualities? One, they don't think the system represents them. Two, they hate polarization. And three, they want solutions. And that's the key here, is that there's so much common pain in this country, and there's so much common discord. Why is it that we can't find the common purpose to solve that common pain? Any one of us goes out onto the street and we say, hey, what do you think of bridge building? No one's going to tell you it's a bad idea. Everyone's going to say, yes, we need more empathy. We need more dialogue. And so the last lever of change that we're pulling is, historically in this country, when you've had mass social movements, the tipping points of those movements, you look at civil rights, climate change, gun control, the tipping point of a lot of those movements that turned them from sort of backwater issues into kitchen table issues was the inclusion of young people across college campuses. And so that's the third final lever, is if we can activate young people across the country to get really passionate about democracy reform, really passionate about reweaving our civic fabric, and really passionate about finding the humanity in each other, I think you can really achieve something substantial. And I'm so happy to see sort of all the different things that are going on. And I think in collaboration, that's really powerful.
Where are you now?
Right now, we're on 40, similar to David, we're on 40 campuses in the United States, 19 different states. And then we have a Bridge Europe and a Bridge Africa branch, which was launched by students in Nairobi, Kenya, and I shouldn't say Eastern Germany, but basically in the eastern part of Germany. So to David's point, we do have some Eastern European hideouts. Lithuania is a great call. So that's what we're up to.
I don't think Eastern Germany counts as Eastern Europe anymore. But Caroline, I've got Jennifer McCoy here. We have Jennifer McCoy here, who's been using open mind modules in her college course on polarization and democratic erosion. My students love it, she says. I thought maybe I would get Jennifer to tell how you got together with her, or how she got together with you, or would you rather take it and introduce her?
No, that sounds great.
Okay, Jennifer, can you get on?
Yeah, sure. I'm here.
Are you on video
I'll
too?
find her and spotlight her. So give me just a sec. Okay, there great. She is. I'm going to bring her up.
Okay, so how did you find out about Open Mind, and what made you
that,
adopt?
I think a colleague told me about it. I really can't remember how I heard about it, and then I looked at it on the website. And I've been teaching a course on political polarization within political science. And so I'm also very passionate about how can we, find these solutions like you do. So I started using it last semester, and when they had still the 5 modules, and now they've expanded to 8 modules. And so what I do is I just assign one of the modules each week, and I'm not doing, they have some extra stuff too, where the students can get together and have one-on-one conversations. I've not gone that far, but just the modules themselves, the students really like it. They tell me, I ask them, what did they learn, during the class? We're meeting on Zoom, but and they can talk about the skills that they learned. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. So I do recommend it. And the only thing, Carolyn, that I really would like to see the before and after surveys, because I need to measure that too, progress in my students. And I know you're not providing those yet. You're getting them, but I would like to get them too.
That's a huge issue. I'm going to get to, major hurdles, but if people don't get to that, one of the things is, how do you measure success in this world, in this field? Do you just have testimonials, and what then would testimonials mean? So, but I'm jumping ahead by doing that. Eva Stern has a question here, and I'll start with you, Caroline, to answer the question, and then go back through the panel here. Eva, you want to put your question to everybody? I'll tell you what the question is.
Yeah, thank you.
So, which is, how do parents fit into the conversation? And I would add grandparents. That's where
Absolutely, I'm a grandparent.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Great. So tell us where's this question coming from?
Well, I'm a social worker, and I'm involved with a program at USC called EDGE, Engagement Driven Global Education. I met Kristen Hansen because of my interests, and I'm very worried about this polarization. And more than that, having conversations in schools, being an educator, I'm on the board of Alliance College Ready Charter Schools. And this divisiveness is crazy. And I see that parents are sort of left out of the conversation, and they live with their parents. The parents pay for their college, most of them. I mean, they need to be part of the buy-in. So that's why I asked.
All right. So Caroline, why don't you start? Although you already had I assume you had a grown-up at least responding to the use of open mind. But how do we involve parents and grandparents, or is that more your target audience to begin with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't typically work with parents themselves, though we do have families who go through Open Mind. The biggest challenge that we've had is just trying to figure out where are the existing infrastructures where we can plug into and scale very easily. So just picking up also on a couple of the other questions that you've asked everyone else, and that's come up. Yeah. So the way that we work is, as Jennifer described, within higher ed, we primarily have individual professors incorporating Open Mind into their existing courses. We also are used by student groups, as well as administrators who are bringing Open Mind campus-wide to things like orientation, first year experience. And so through those models, we've reached more than 45,000 learners over the last 3 years. We've been used in more than 1,500 college classrooms, more than 300 high school classrooms, and we've worked with more than 100 other types of organizations. So what we're seeing from that is that, again, there are these kind of existing spaces where it's much easier to plug in. So it's easy to plug into learning environments like schools. We also believe that adult education is incredibly important. And what we're finding is that the place where adults are learning most today is through their companies, actually. So companies are investing more and more in upskilling their employees. There's a lot of emphasis in soft skills. And what we're seeing is that there's tremendous demand from the corporate environment for employees to have these skills, because their workforces are increasingly diverse, and they're also struggling with this inability to communicate and collaborate across differences. So what I would say is that we do work with a lot of adult learners. It's just much more difficult to engage parents because there isn't a clear system or infrastructure for doing that. But the families who have used it, we've had multi-generational families who have gone through this together, and they find it incredibly valuable, and it gives them this kind of shared language, shared set of skills that they can refer back to and build upon over time to navigate their internal conflicts. So I think that engaging parents more is a really important part of this puzzle.
Okay, so Eva Stern's question to you, Seth. How do you engage the parents? After all, you're talking about middle school kids, so. they got parents, all of them.
Yes, they do. So, I mean, we haven't particularly focused on that, but I mean, in terms of bringing parents into it, something that we also learned in the pilot phase when we were implementing this across the country, the curriculum was there are legitimate concerns for many educators across the country in terms of teaching content, but also utilizing certain things that challenge students' points of view, because in some ways, in doing that, many of us may view that that's like productive and students should do that. But we also need to understand we live in a country where a lot of people are raised and parents teach their children to want to follow certain things. And by doing that, teachers also, in teaching middle school students, there's just like hesitation and concern. I mean, I don't know how broadly it is, but educators also have to work with the parents of the students they teach, and that can result in some challenges, especially if certain topics are brought up in a middle school classroom that a parent may not want their child to actually be thinking about at that age or talking about it among other groups. So I think there just needs to be a more deeper connection in general of like teachers and parents communicating about these things in a more productive way.
David, you want to talk about parents and grandparents?
Sure. So the way we involve parents is by taking a kid from a very different place and sticking him in the home of a family. We do homestays in our program. The way it works is that kids travel across the country and stay with families. And so what happens is that the perspectives that come from, if it's me traveling Boston, end up traveling not just to the kid that I'm staying with, but to their family and their grandparents. We have our families meet on Zoom. We have parents arranging a lot of the events that happen. We found that the chief source of a new idea for an adult, certainly a new idea that they're open-minded to, comes not necessarily from a book or a lecture or something they saw on the news. It actually comes from their children. I know there's a little show called The Office, for example, that my parents never would have watched in a million years until my youngest brother said, "Mom and Dad, sit down and watch this." They're now watched it 3 times and quote it every day. So we find that if we, through our program, can get kids really enthusiastic about it, parents might be a little bit more open-minded to this too. And while they may not necessarily agree with views that are very different from their own, they'll certainly have a much more human perspective of the sorts of places and the sorts of perspectives that the kids that they're staying with come from. And we're also contemplating working on all sorts of events through our program, between getting the families of our students together on Zoom to some of the work that we do, like tell your life story in 6 words, or pull something off your desk. Here's an object. What does it mean to you? One of the governing philosophies behind AEP is that the beliefs that we all have that have become so at odds with other beliefs in this country really come from a difference in the experiences that we've had, and that those experiences are shaped largely by the vastly different circumstances in which Americans are living today. And so really, while it's about reconciling beliefs, it's also about understanding different experiences and seeing different circumstances. And so we think that as kids travel, their parents and indeed their grandparents might become more open-minded to it. I know Paul talks often about how one of the things that all grandparents bond over is being a grandparent. Well, one of the things that all parents support, regardless of where you come from or what your political beliefs might be, is great opportunities for your kids. The other way I think parents can get involved even more generally, working with high school kids, I see the sorts of things high school kids are doing every summer. And that's paying thousands of dollars to go play football or baseball or basketball or soccer or hockey, to go get recruited by college coaches, or to go to leadership camp or computer science camp, or how you can jump higher and get bigger muscles camp, whatever these kids are doing. There's no reason why parents shouldn't be also pushing these kids toward the sorts of opportunities that Caroline and Seth and Manu and I are offering here through our program. And so if the world of organizations that work with adults on this stuff can somehow persuade parents to push their kids towards these sorts of things as well, I think is a key element of getting adults more involved in the sorts of work that we're all doing more generally.
Manu, parents or
well,
they
Paul, if you're a parent, you got college age kids, tell them to start a bridge chapter. And if you've got high school kids, tell them to join AEP. And if they're in middle school, read Seth's guide. The key here is, it's really about experience and like what differentiates the mentality and the sensibilities of the people that are growing up in this day and age. They're 20, 21. I'll give you a pretty sobering analytic. Anyone that's 21, 22, my age, there's 4 major events that have defined the political story of our lifetimes. It's 9/11, the Great Recession, the 2016 election, and the year that is 2020, including the Capitol riots. And that's not a great sample size of progress in democracy. Now, let's say you were born in the 80s or the 70s, especially the 80s. You grew up at the pinnacle of American power, where the Soviet Union collapsed, and all that was in front of the United States was boundless progress and opportunity. And that is a mindset sensibility shift that we have to reconcile with. And I think the best way to do that is for parents to actually directly address that. The mentality and the mindsets of students, what they see in the news, greatly impacts, and especially young people, what they see happening around them greatly impacts both how you think about your country, how you think about the possibility for progress, and importantly, how you think about how you can actually achieve change. And oftentimes, a lot of young people don't necessarily think that the system can respond. That's the best way to actually intervene as a parent, is to challenge those notions and to think about those in critical ways. And those are tough conversations to have, but they're what we've seen across our campuses when students engage and talk to us. The number one answer to hopelessness and apathy is what they see in the news, and what they've seen has defined American politics. And the other point of this are Thanksgiving dinners. 4 or 5 years ago, the idea of a Thanksgiving dinner used to be really exciting. And now you'll have wings of your family dreading it. And our job is on college campuses is to help young people see the humanity in each other. One of our mentors once says that the best antidote to polarization is humanization. It's humanizing the intentions, it's seeing past the person's argument, and it's seeing and recognizing that each of us have valid experiences. And by achieving that mentality combined with challenging the notions and mindsets that young people are developing, I think you can have a really incredibly powerful impact on the psyche of your child.
Jenny asks a question here. There are many bridge building organizations. I wonder if there would be coordination, connections among these great programs for youth and programs that are designed for adults. Have you all been connecting with each other? David, you and Manu do know each other, I see. Is there a lack of coordination? There is something called the Bridge Alliance, as we know, and as Jenny is pointing out here, that is an umbrella for groups like ours. But has there been substantial integration yet? Is that something people aspire to? What's the problem to the extent that it isn't happening? Seth, start with you, and I'm sorry, then I'll do Caroline.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of collaboration, and I'll just say Pierce, who's on the call, is one of the leaders in those efforts of bringing people together, and just many of these groups so that people can actually build relationships and then like develop a space to figure out what those synergies are. And, in particular, I don't think there's any lack of it. It's just, I mean, there are a lot of organizations out there focusing on these efforts. And similarly, I think to just the nonprofit space in general, I think, one, there are just too many nonprofits in general in this country. And I do think more collaboration is better instead of, duplicative efforts or groups that, if they came together could actually be stronger instead of being apart.
Well, although here it looks like you can be a feeder to AEP, which can be a feeder to Manu, all of us using open line. So it's a sort of a natural set of collaborations here. Caroline, you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. So I would just add to what Seth just mentioned and say that what I experienced over the last couple of years is that there were an emergence of new actors in the aftermath of the 2016 election. It sounds like most, if not all, of these organizations on this call really sprang up in reaction to the 2016 election. And for the first couple of years, it kind of felt like the Wild Wild West, where no one knew what was going on. There was no organization. No one knew who else was doing what. And there was a lot of this just kind of like feeling out into the space of like, well, who else is out here? And what are you doing? And how can we work together? And I think in the last year, especially, there's been a lot more formalization around, well, wait a minute, this is a really, really significant problem. It's maybe the critical critical problem of our time, because it is the underpinning of all the other social challenges that we're working on. And if we can't get this right, we won't really make progress on anything else. And so it seems as though there's more awareness of this problem, and there's also more awareness of the fact that this isn't going to go away anytime soon. This is, at least a decade's worth of work to really make progress on these issues. And so I've seen, especially over the course of 2020 and into this year, there's been a lot more organization, a lot more strategic collaboration. So in addition to the work that Pierce is doing with Bridge Alliance and Listen First, there's also a new collaborative called The New Pluralists that I'm a part of, and I think maybe others on the call might be a part of. And The New Pluralists is a collaborative movement between a number of cross-partisan funders, practitioners, researchers, and storytellers who are all coming together and recognizing that we need to really invest in establishing a true field for this work and support one another and act in coordination so that we're not duplicating one another's efforts, and instead we're really amplifying the work of each of us individually. So I'm really encouraged that I think that we're seeing a lot of progress in this space.
And Pierce writes here that the Listen First Coalition, 250 plus organizations bringing Americans together across these differences. Each of the panelists apparently are in fact members of this. So yes, so it is happening. I want to move to, I think that the toughest nut, at least for American Exchange Project, which is, well, I'll put it more generally, because rather than assume that I know what the toughest hurdle is for each of us or each of you, Manu, what's the toughest hurdle for you?
The toughest hurdle is that we're not in front of as many young people as we need to be. And the hurdle for us, I don't think actually is, again, as I said, the problem is an implicit demand problem. Right now, after the Capitol riots, you have an incredible amount of engagement with young people, especially in the election. In 2020, you had a 50% turnout, which means that Gen Z is highly engaged and people are thinking about where they fit into this broader political challenge. And they don't have alternative options to the tribalism that you see today. They don't. And I think that the biggest obstacle for us is that we need to do a better job, and it's primarily us as individuals, we need to do a better job of presenting Bridge as the third menu item on those two options that you see right now. If you're a student on campus, you're a young person, it takes someone once said that it either takes a narcissist or a masochist to start something. It is really hard to break the system. It is really hard to challenge the dominant power structures that we see. And so if you're a student, you're like, gosh, things look so hopeless right now, but I want to do something about it, and I don't have an avenue to do. And it's really difficult to start up your own organization. And so our job is, how can we create the most prepackaged set of tools, the best and easiest guides, integrate tools like Open Mind, and basically demonstrate that if you're a student and you have a modicum of desire, ambition to get involved, here's how you can make an impact. And then highlighting those stories. That's the second part, is the people that believe in empathy, dialogue, engagement. Those are not just moderates. Those are people with very strong beliefs. You can be a really strong activist who turns out people in the Democratic and Republican primaries and then go home and still love your Republican neighbor. And so we have to make those people louder than those on the extremes. And that's the second obstacle, is empowering and making sure that we're doing a good enough job of highlighting the story. So when you're a student on your campus and you see only the people on the extremes shouting and engaging, you feel like, no, actually there is another option, and that I don't have to fold and buckle.
David, what's the biggest hurdle?
I would agree with Manu. Anonymity, funding, and then how do we measure success in that order? Manu picked up a lot of it. We're not loud enough. We're not on the scene enough. Kids don't know that we exist, that these options are out there, and that there is this growing movement around the partisan options that they see. The other thing, there are $415 billion that are donated in this country every single year. Less than 2% of them go to efforts that help rebuild American democracy. That shows you where the mindset of our country is. I call all the time and I hear that most funding is going to whatever party that particular funder agrees with. And that doesn't seem to me to be particularly effective grand strategic thinking. We need a better argument. We need a louder argument. We need to be closer to the center of the stage for all of this stuff. And then finally, it's a little bit hard to measure what we're doing. I mean, if we go to a kid and say, hey, are you empathetic? They're going to say, yeah, sure. And
are you more empathetic than you were before you started?
Than you were before. I mean, who's going to say absolutely not to that? It takes a pretty bold kid to say that. In fact, the kid who probably says that is pretty open-minded and honest, which is sort of what we're after anyway. And so figuring out how we can be more measurable, and that's a larger way of saying, in a way, kind of more legit, I think is a really, really huge piece of what this movement needs to evolve into, and evolve into quickly. Manu is absolutely on point when he sees the kind of palpable demand that people don't even know about for this sort of work. The call is there, and it's on our organizations to grow as quickly as possible, because the bell is absolutely ringing.
But there's another problem that I've seen with American Exchange Project, and I'm interested in whether or not it's true of the other people here on the panel, which is this is too easily seen. This meaning the entire project to try to bridge the gap is too easily seen by people who on the right as an attempt to get them to change their mind. I mean, I understand that our rhetoric is never that, and in fact, it isn't what's motivating us. Perhaps subconsciously it is, but it's certainly not our stated purpose. But here we are, people who are all highly educated and so forth. And for the American Exchange Project, it's easier for us to keep the kids from the suburban high schools than it is to keep the kids from Texas, right, David?
Yes, absolutely. We in those video calls, we ran them as an experiment. We had kids from all different backgrounds off to all sorts of futures in the beginning. They all got along really well. And then over time, it kind of became the Wellesley, Massachusetts to Palo Alto exchange program. And the kids became more liberal. They became from more affluent communities, not necessarily affluent backgrounds, affluent families. And then 100% of our students were on their way to college. That wasn't the case at the beginning of the program. We have all sorts of reasons as to why that evolved, but it's really hard to reach and persuade the kids that need this the most. And our philosophy is that a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, and our spoonful of sugar is free travel, free travel, free travel. And so that we find is a challenge we're constantly pushing up against. But as I said, we started a traveling program during a pandemic, so I don't know how it's going to go once we have some happy faces and cool place pictures to show off. Hopefully it's after 2022.
Seth, you have the same problem or no?
I don't think so. I mean, to answer the original question, like one of the biggest challenges, I think for us and many different civic organizations, we are the Better Arguments Project, and it is to bring people together to have arguments. And I think in terms of many civic engagement and civil discourse focused organizations, there is a real challenge in making sure that you are bringing people together who don't already think similarly. And that is like a really big challenge that I think just requires a lot more work and being strategic. And we are ourselves working to make sure that we can bring more people into the conversation who do think differently. And I think that's just going to take some time and different strategies to make sure we reach different groups that are, not potentially people who would already engage in something. I mean, there are a lot of people in this country who are not people who would likely attend what all of us on this video call are doing right now. And those people really need to be brought into the conversation. And I think for many organizations, it's also on us to make sure we are doing enough efforts in messaging and outreach to make sure those people who may not be more willing to engage in these types of conversations feel also welcomed by us in those conversations, so that they are able to feel engaged, because the division is incredibly high, as we all know. And with affective polarization, I was looking at some data from University of Pennsylvania that in the 1960s, 5% of people in the United States felt that they would oppose if their child were to actually marry someone of the various political party. Today in 2019, that number is almost 40%. And that's a really big problem, and more needs to be done to fight that. And there are many ways that it's also being exacerbated by, obviously difficult rhetoric and things that are out there. But I do think there's a lot of optimism, as well as, there was a September 2020 study done out of the Carr Center for Public Policy at Harvard that 7 in 10 Americans believe that they actually have more in common with each other than we think. But if you were to watch the news and, think and pull little pieces out of social media, you would think that we are very, very divided, which we are. We also cannot let that narrative of the division be what guides us to, other outcomes that might be dangerous, and not, as Manu had said earlier, giving a lot of power to voices that are not adding a lot of value to the conversation.
Caroline, biggest hurdles?
I would say that the hurdles that we're facing are somewhat similar to the themes that I'm hearing across what Seth, Manu, and David have shared. So I can address all of them because we have the same kinds of challenges and have approached them in different ways. So the first question, which I think, Paul, you were also trying to get at, was this question of measurement. And so as an organization, we focus quite a bit on research. So not only are we teaching the existing behavioral science research, but we're also conducting academic research on an ongoing basis to measure the effectiveness of our tools and then constantly iterate based on that data that we're receiving to make them better and better and better. So we have these assessments that are embedded within our program that students or learners take at the very beginning, at the end, and 1 month later. And what we found so far is that more than 70% of our learners are less affectively polarized after completing the program. And what that means, affectively polarized, is the kind of negative attitudes that people have towards one another are decreasing. So people feel more warmth or more positivity towards one another. So we're really, really encouraged by that statistic. We're also seeing positive effects on things like increasing intellectual humility. So more than 50% of our learners are more intellectually humble after completing the program. We also see positive effects on things like perspective taking. And we see that these effects last for at least 1 month after completing the program with no additional intervention. So again, we're really encouraged by this, but we also are struggling with the same challenge across the field, that it's very, very difficult to measure what we're working on. And what we're seeing so far is great, but we're working more and more towards behavioral measures. So thinking about, okay, well, how does this translate to the way that people are actually communicating, or to how conversations are had in a classroom or online? So we're working with a number of researchers now to develop these more robust or more rigorous measures to actually measure that behavior change and track it over time. We're also working more on developing tools to make sure that these habits of heart and mind are sticky. So that's the other challenge in all this work, that it's great to have this one experience or to go through this course. And when you learn something, you can say like, okay, I got this, right? But then when you're in the midst of a really difficult conversation, right, it's like a deer in the headlights. It's very, very difficult to remember that thing that you learned that time. And so we're working more and more to ensure that people have, again, really sticky habits coming out of completing Open Mind. So that's one, interrelated set of challenges. The second thing I would say is this question about the self-selection bias of who is participating in these types of activities is something that everyone is grappling with. And there are two specific ways that we have worked to get around that in our work. So the first is that we are very intentional about not working with individuals. We're not trying to just reach as many individuals in society as possible. We work with communities or groups that are already in existence. So we'll work with a classroom, a campus, et cetera. And the reason for that is the people who are then deciding to bring Open Mind into their respective group, they then have a much more diverse group than the individuals who had self-selected into Open Mind to begin with. So we collect all this data on political orientation, and we see that we actually have a pretty evenly divided split of students and learners across political orientations. So again, because the students themselves are not self-selecting into it, it's the professors that are choosing to bring it to them. We're getting a much more diverse population. And then the second thing is the way that we frame this work is also incredibly important. So different language, different messaging is going to resonate very differently with different people. And so we're very, very attentive to that. And even within the program, we are often positioning what we're doing, not in terms of, this lofty goal of, trying to repair democracy. We talk about that, but what we talk about more and what we emphasize more is really positioning this as, how is this going to help you as an individual accomplish what you care about, accomplish your goals? individuals. So we're really positioning it in terms of, what's the value proposition for the individual learner, and then also tailoring that value proposition based on the learner's pre-existing profile. So we do a lot of work to, again, capture this information about who are these learners, what is their persona, what's their worldview, what will resonate with them, and how can we ensure that the program is adapting to those different learners to be maximally effective. So those are some of the tools that we're using right now to ensure that we're able to reach and resonate with a broad and diverse audience.
All right, so we've got only about 6 minutes left. There's one question that's been hanging here for a while. It's Roy Vela. I'm just going to read it, Roy, rather than bring you on, because I want to get everybody to respond. How do we provide a common source of truth, in quotes, as he puts it? Apps like Ground News show how the old bell curve of centrist news is turning into polarized coverage on the left and right, as we all, of course, know. Troubling as it means, there are two realities happening. So how do any of you, deal with that problem? Or don't you? Seth?
What was the first part? How do we make sure there's...
How do we provide a common source of truth as opposed to two completely different realities? And so you can never get across to the person on the other side because you don't even agree on the facts.
I mean, that's also one of the fundamental challenges that I think all of us faces. I mean, there are, we live in a time now where it's, when you share certain things, I mean, people will stick to what they're talking about, even if it's not factual. And I think there are many other efforts that need to happen to combat misinformation. And I think like the Better Arguments framework and other efforts as well for organizations, for people to come together and actually engage productively, so that even if people do believe something that's not true, or they are bought into misinformation, they are at least in the space that should be like welcoming and structured in a way where there are like community agreements for people to actually share certain things and potentially change their mind on a certain thing. But having a common truth is that's a very difficult question to answer.
But in some sense, that's what every one of these efforts is trying to deal with, right? Manu, right?
Yeah, I want to take a little bit of an issue with one of the threads in the chat, which is that if you're conservative, you're fundamentally against being open-minded, or that open-minded is going to grind with that mindset. And the reason why I challenge that is because I think that the problem, and this is, I'm not a conservative, but I talk to a lot of young people, and this relates to the media question, is there's more of a trust issue. Whenever we set up a chapter on a campus, right? Whenever we engage students that are really passionate about, political engagement or whatever the case may be, they always ask, is this a liberal hoax? Not so much I'm against actually talking to someone in the space. Believe it or not, when we started our Berkeley chapter, the most audience we had in the beginning were conservatives, because they feel under threat at Berkeley. At Hillsdale and colleges like UT Austin, we have more liberal students because they feel more under threat because the dominant ideology is conservatives. And so I just wanted to add a little bit of nuance to that question, which is that the challenge is an interesting one, at least on students and in terms of campuses. When it comes to the media, Paul, and when we're thinking about how we diversify our news sources, I think we forget how much agency we as people have in this process. I think that we assume that we're going to be controlled by the tech companies and it is what it is. No, we get to pick what we see. We have agency in liking posts. We have agencies in sharing posts. And I'll give you an analogy to this. In the 70s and 80s, a lot of chips companies, junk food companies, had huge lobbying efforts against them because people were saying that we're all subject to a lot of high sugar. What they came out with was nutrition labels, and they came out with empowering the consumer. And nutrition labels are a relatively new phenomenon. And I think in terms of social media and news consumption, how we think about what we're engaging in and pre-selecting, I think we have to educate the person that's actually watching those sources. And I think that job falls on the organizations. And so that's the one thing that I would say. And I'm excited that I've started a little chat storm about the conservative point I made, but that's what we're here for, right?
Congratulations. Yes, well, that's what we're here for. Exactly. David and Caroline, you a minute each to just speak to this issue of a common source of truth, or if you want, what do you need for your organizations in order to make them realize the ambitions you have for them? You have the choice. 1 minute, David. Caroline.
In terms of the common source of truth, just quickly, because everything that's been said so far is especially on point. I won't want to reiterate any of it, but I'll add our own little bit, which is to remember that you have agency. I mean, Eric Sevareid famously said that democracies hinge on risk and faith in one another. And I think that before we can have faith in our democracy again, we need to renew our faith in one another. And to do that, we need to take the great risk of running into ideas and places and people who are very different from our own. I think everyone on this call, all 57 of us, agrees with that sentiment. But let's go there. I'm on vacation in Puerto Rico right now, and I've been reading for the last 7 weeks about the pork barbecue places up in the mountains of Puerto Rico. And no matter how much I read and how much I saw online, they were nothing like actually going there, driving the winding roads up in the mountains, actually sitting down, tasting the pork, seeing the people sitting next to me, seeing what they talked about, what kind of cars they drove, the way they wore their hats, the logos on their shirts. And all of that helped construct for me an image of what this place is actually like and where their viewpoints and lifestyles come from. I think in this country, we need to take Manu's point and remind ourselves that we have agency, that we have the ability, the freedom to go out and do these things, to find the truth that we feel we lack. And so we need to do that. Get off our butts and go see the country. That might be AEP's new motto, Zoe, if you want to write that down. In terms of what we need a network. We need to get the word out. I think we all need to make sure that this is especially true to what Paul said. Folks who need this the most, and we all know who that is, are able to hear that the work is what it is, that we're not liberal Trojan horses, and that we're genuine about the work that we're trying to do and that we're trying to do right by every American. That's what I see the most when I go to these marginalized communities, is folks looking to us and saying, are you going to do right by me? Then you have our faith. Then will you meet our needs? And the beauty of it is that the needs of most Americans right now within the realm of what we do are actually very similar. And it's just a question of getting.
Caroline, last word to you.
I'll be brief because I know that Kristen has to jump to another call. But I would just say that in terms of this question of how to establish ground truth, a lot of what we do at Open Mind is also really educate people about how the mind works, how we process information, the cognitive biases that lead us to things like confirmation bias, motivated reasoning, and how we can learn to overcome those biases ourselves and challenge them. So again, I think it's a lot about empowerment and really educating citizens to navigate this complex media ecosystem.
Cool. Well, we're 5:01, so I think we did pretty well. And it's sort of amazing. I guess it's because Kristen set it up this way, perhaps, and who she invited. But the fact that it literally goes from middle school to high school to college to the program that deals with everybody and tries to teach us all how to and how we're thinking strikes me as a cosmic conjunction. Kristen, to you.
That's right, Paul. We're building a bridging pipeline, and we're just going to send as many kids through as we possibly can. So I hope you'll all kind of take that image away in your minds. Well, bridges and pipeline might be a mixed metaphor. We thank you all so much for being on this panel event with us today. Thank you for spending an hour of your day with us. These are 4 phenomenal organizations. They need your help, your support, and your megaphone. So please give them all of the above. Paul, thank you for being our moderator today. We can't thank you enough. And all of you have a wonderful day. We'll follow up.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming.